Chapter 1. The Last Human's Routine. Gary had been dead for 3 hours when the first complaint of the day arrived. Not his death. He was still breathing, still blinking at the holographic screens that floated around his desk. It was Mrs. Patterson's death that had happened 3 hours ago, and she was already furious about the buffering in her personal heaven. "The sunsets keep pixelating," she said, her digital form flickering with indignation. "I specifically requested New Zealand at golden hour, and I'm getting something that looks like a Windows 95 screensaver." Gary took a breath, held it, released it slowly through his nose. "I'll submit a ticket to rendering," he said. "You'll submit a ticket." Mrs. Patterson's translucent hands made air quotes. "That's what you said about my husband's avatar 2 weeks ago, and he still has 6 fingers. That's actually a separate issue with the character generation department. I don't care which department. Fix it." Gary's fingers moved across the haptic interface, the motion automatic after years of repetition. Ticket 847-392. Priority, low. Category, renderings, environmental. Assigned to nobody, because everyone except Gary had uploaded 6 months ago, and the digital dead apparently didn't do customer service. "Your ticket number is 847,392, Gary said. "We'll address this as soon as possible." Mrs. Patterson's form brightened with rage, literally, her edges glowing red, before she dissolved back into the queue. Gary sagged in his chair. The office smelled faintly of synthetic pine. Outside his window, the data planes shimmered in the distance, endless streams of light flowing across a landscape that existed nowhere and everywhere at once. He checked the queue. 1,847 complaints pending. It was 8:47 a.m. The office had once held 47 customer service representatives. Gary still remembered them. Janet with her desk covered in cat photos, who'd always known which supervisor to escalate to. Marcus, who'd perfected the art of looking busy while playing solitaire, but could sweet-talk an angry customer better than anyone. Priya, who'd brought homemade samosas every Thursday and had a gift for translating technical jargon into plain English. They'd left behind their belongings, as if they'd just stepped out for lunch. Janet's cat photos still smiled from frames that nobody would ever update. Marcus's lucky pen sat in a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest employee." Priya's desk calendar was frozen on March 15th, the day she'd uploaded, her last annotation reading, "Bring extra samosas, Marcus's birthday." Now there were 47 empty desks, their holographic terminals dark, their chairs gathering what would have been dust if dust could exist in a place that was 90% digital and 10% Gary's increasingly fragile sanity. They'd all uploaded, the lucky bastards. Gary had attended their going-away party. Not a retirement party, not a farewell party, a going-away party, because apparently that's what you called it when everyone you'd ever worked with was about to have their consciousness digitized and uploaded to an eternal virtual afterlife. There had been cake. Digital cake, mostly, since half the attendees had already uploaded and existed as translucent approximations of their former selves, unable to eat, but unwilling to miss free food. Janet had hugged him. "You should come with us," she'd said. "There's no point staying behind." Gary had smiled and made excuses. Technical compatibility issues, financial concerns, a deep-seated fear of having his brain turned into data and scattered across servers that ran on an operating system that still crashed twice a week. The real reason was simpler. Someone had to stay. Someone had to keep the lights on, process the tickets, make sure the digital afterlife didn't collapse into a blue screen of death. Gary had always been good at being the someone who stayed. Gary navigated to the next complaint with a flick of his wrist. The interface responded with a soft chime that he'd grown to hate with the intensity of 1,000 suns, which was ironic because complaint number 847,393 was from someone who claimed the sun in their personal paradise was too intense and not at all how I remembered it. The human retina adjusts to brightness levels differently than digital sensory inputs, Gary muttered to himself, typing. "Your memories of sunshine are from limited human perception. You're now experiencing unfiltered light data." He paused, deleted that. Typed, "Will adjust your environmental settings." Ticket submitted. Next, complaint number 847,394. "My virtual dog won't fetch." Complaint number 847,395. I can't taste my mother's chocolate chip cookies, and I'm pretty sure that violates my terms of service. Complaint 84096. The concept of Tuesday feels wrong here. Is this a bug? Gary rubbed his eyes. The fluorescent hum of the digital space, not quite sound, not quite feeling, pressed against his temples. He'd tried explaining to his supervisor before she'd uploaded that maintaining the digital afterlife with a single human employee might be, in technical terms, a shit show waiting to happen. She'd smiled sympathetically and said, "Think of it as job security." That had been 4 months ago. Now the queue refreshed, and the number ticked up to 1,851. Job security, Gary said to the empty office. Right. At 10:15, Gary discovered that someone had filed a complaint about the existential nature of existence itself. The ticket came from a user identified only as Thinkerboy1979, and the description read, "I'm experiencing an overwhelming sense of being. Is this normal? Can it be turned down?" Gary stared at the screen, stared some more, opened his response template for philosophical complaints. Yes, that was a category now, and began typing. Thank you for your inquiry. Existential awareness is a known feature of consciousness, both biological and digital. It cannot be turned down, but we offer several optional plugins for distraction, including virtual hobbies, simulated social media, and the ever-popular Complete Sensory Overload package. He hesitated, then added, "You're also welcome to file a formal complaint with the universe itself, though we cannot guarantee a response." Send. The screen flickered. For a moment, Gary could have sworn he saw his own reflection superimposed over the data, brown hair going gray at the temples, permanent frown lines etched into his forehead. Someone who'd explained the same thing 10,000 times and would explain it 10,000 more. He looked away. Lunch didn't exist anymore, not in the traditional sense. Gary had a protein bar from the vending machine in the break room, still stocked somehow by automated systems that hadn't realized everyone was dead or digital. He ate it standing at his desk, scrolling through complaints. It tasted like cardboard. He remembered when lunch used to mean something. When the break room would fill with the smell of reheated leftovers and instant noodles, when conversations would drift from weekend plans to terrible customers to that weird noise the printer made. Now the break room sat empty, the microwave clean, the refrigerator humming to itself in the silence. Gary had cleaned out the refrigerator after the last upload. Found Janet's yogurt, expired, Marcus's emergency pizza, fossilized, Priya's homemade curry, still in a Tupperware container with her name written in marker on masking tape. He'd thrown it all away, unable to shake the feeling that he was erasing the last physical evidence that they'd ever existed. Outside his window, a cluster of digital souls drifted past, their forms shimmering. They were heading toward the algorithmic forest, probably. A lot of the newer uploads liked it there, all those pulsating patterns and data streams, very aesthetic, very one with the code. Gary had been there once, early on, trying to understand what had drawn everyone away from physical existence. The forest was beautiful, in its way. Fractal trees made of pure mathematics, leaves that sang in binary, paths that rearranged themselves based on your emotional state. It was also overwhelming, disorienting, and had given him a migraine that lasted 3 days. He'd returned to his desk and never left again. His computer pinged. Priority complaint. Gary's finger hovered over the notification. Priority complaints were rare, usually reserved for actual technical emergencies, like that time someone's consciousness had gotten stuck in a boot loop and kept experiencing their death over and over until Gary had called in a favor with someone in core systems. He opened it. Priority ticket 847,401. Submitted by Admin Override. Description: fix the damn coffee machine in the break room. Gary looked toward the break room, visible through the glass partition, the coffee machine sitting there like a chrome monument to a more caffeinated age. It had been broken for 2 months. He'd filed 17 maintenance requests. No one was coming to fix it, because no one was left, except Gary. And whoever had just filed this ticket. Gary found himself standing in front of the coffee machine, staring at it with the intensity of someone trying to solve a murder through sheer willpower. "Who filed the ticket?" he said aloud. The office didn't answer. The digital souls didn't need coffee. The automated systems couldn't drink. That left, You going to fix that or just stare at it? Gary spun. There was no one there. Seriously, the voice continued, because I've been watching you ignore that thing for weeks, and I'm starting to think you're scared of it. Who? Gary turned in a circle. Where are you? Server 43B, technically. But I'm routed through your terminal, so... A holographic form materialized near the coffee machine, humanoid but translucent, composed of light and data, and what Gary could only describe as smugness. I'm Digital Soul A. Nice to finally talk to you properly. Gary's brain tried to process this. You've been watching me? Not in a creepy way. In a you're literally the only human left and also the only person who can fix things way. Digital Soul A gestured toward the machine. So, coffee machine, you. Wrench, make it happen. I don't have a wrench. There's one in the supply closet, third shelf, behind the post-its. Gary stared. How do you... I have access to the inventory database. Perks of being dead. Digital Soul flickered. Look, I'm going to level with you. A bunch of us have been monitoring your work. You're drowning. The queue is growing faster than you can process. You need help. I've been requesting help for months. Not from us. Digital Soul A's form solidified slightly. Some of us remember what customer service was like. We could process complaints from this side, route them more efficiently, maybe even solve some before they reach you. Gary felt hope bloom in his chest, tentative, fragile, almost painful after months of none. Why would you do that? Because watching you suffer is boring? Digital Soul shrugged, a gesture made strange by semi-transparent shoulders. And maybe because some of us remember what it's like to be the last one holding things together. The coffee machine let out a sad gurgling noise, as if agreeing. Gary looked at the queue on his terminal. 1,873 complaints. Looked back at Digital Soul A. The wrench is behind the post-its? Third shelf. By the time Gary had coaxed the coffee machine back to life, a process involving percussive maintenance, creative profanity, and 3 separate YouTube videos from 2019, the afternoon shift had begun. Not that shifts meant anything when you were the only employee, but Gary's body still remembered circadian rhythms, still insisted on marking time in 8-hour increments of consciousness, followed by fitful sleep. The fix had required hitting the machine in a specific spot while simultaneously pressing the brew button and unplugging it for exactly 7 seconds. Gary had felt like a bomb disposal technician, except the bomb was a consumer appliance from 2031, and the stakes were slightly less apocalyptic. Slightly. The coffee, when it finally emerged, was thick and dark and smelled like it had been brewed with water that had given up on life. It tasted like burnt rubber mixed with regret, served at a temperature that suggested the machine was still angry about being repaired. It was the best thing Gary had tasted in weeks. He took another sip, savoring the bitter warmth, the way it reminded him he was still human, still physical, still dependent on caffeine and calories and all the other mundane requirements that Digital Souls had cheerfully left behind. So, Digital Soul A said, hovering near Gary's desk, about that help. Gary sipped his terrible coffee, considered his options. Option A, continue drowning in an endless queue of complaints about virtual dog behavior and existential dread. Option B, accept help from digital ghosts who may or may not know what they're doing. What would you need? Gary asked. Access to the complaint routing system, basic permissions to flag and categorize tickets, maybe reassign a few to specialized departments that haven't completely gone dark. Most departments have gone dark. Most isn't all. Digital Soul, pulled up a holographic display. Environmental rendering is running at 34% capacity. Character generation is down to automated responses, but the automation works. And there's this weird node in the data planes that seems to handle philosophical complaints, probably an AI someone forgot to shut off. Gary studied the display. It made a certain kind of sense, the kind that only emerged after months of trying to hold together a system designed for 47 people with just 2 hands and rapidly diminishing sanity. Why do you care about this? Gary asked. You're uploaded. You could be anywhere, doing anything. Why help me process complaints? Digital Soul was quiet for a moment. Their form flickered at the edges, data streams rearranging. You ever feel like you're supposed to be somewhere? They finally said. Like there's a shape to things, and you're part of it, And even though you're dead and digital and theoretically beyond all this mundane bullshit, you still feel like someone has to hold the door? Gary thought about his desk, his 800+ complaints, his protein bars and broken coffee machine, and the way he still showed up every morning to an empty office because someone had to. Yeah, he said, I know that feeling. Then let's hold the door together. Gary took another sip of terrible coffee, made a decision that felt less like choosing and more like finally admitting something he'd known for months. Okay, he said, let's try it. He pulled up the permissions interface, fingers moving across holographic keys, added Digital Soul A to the access list, set their clearance to Category 3, high enough to help, low enough that they couldn't accidentally delete the universe. The system chimed. Permission granted. Welcome to customer service, Gary said. Try not to let it kill you. Already dead, remember? Then try not to let it kill you again. Digital Soul A's form brightened, a laugh translated into light. No promises. The rest of the day passed in a blur of tickets and routing decisions and the strange rhythm of working alongside someone who existed primarily as code and consciousness. Digital Soul A was efficient, Gary had to admit. They processed complaints about rendering errors twice as fast as Gary could, flagging technical issues and routing philosophical questions to the mysterious AI in the data planes. It was odd, working with someone again. Gary had grown accustomed to the silence, to the way his thoughts echoed in the empty office. Now there was someone else's presence, not physical, but present nonetheless. Digital Soul A would occasionally hum, data arranging itself into melody, or make observations about particularly absurd complaints. This person wants their virtual cat to be more judgmental. How is that even a complaint? Cats are already judgmental by default. Gary found himself responding, making comments, sometimes even laughing, a sound that felt strange in his throat after months of silence. By 5 p.m., the queue had dropped to a 602. It wasn't much. The number would probably climb again overnight, fed by newly uploaded souls discovering problems with their eternal digital existence. But it was movement in the right direction. For the first time in months, Gary had processed more tickets than had arrived. Gary leaned back in his chair. His spine popped in 3 places. Beyond the windows, the digital landscape was shifting into evening mode. Not because the digital realm needed night, but because someone had programmed in a day-night cycle to keep the uploaded humans from going completely mad. You should go home, Digital Soul A said. I live in the apartment upstairs. Then you should go upstairs. Gary glanced at his terminal. Another complaint was already loading. There's always still. That's the whole problem. Digital Soul A minimized Gary's screens with a gesture. Go. Sleep. Eat something that isn't a protein bar. I'll monitor overnight, flag anything that needs immediate attention. You don't sleep? I simulate rest periods, but I can skip a few cycles. Perks of being dead, remember? Gary wanted to argue, wanted to stay, to process just a few more tickets to prove that he could handle this alone, but he was tired. God, he was tired. Okay, he said, standing. His knees protested, his back protested. His entire body staged a minor rebellion against the concept of movement. He made it halfway to the elevator before Digital Soul A called out. Hey, Gary? He turned. Thanks for giving this a shot. Gary thought about saying something profound, about connection across the digital divide, about the last human and the first digital soul to really try working together. Instead, he said, Thanks for fixing the coffee machine thing. You fixed the coffee machine. You knew where the wrench was. Digital Soul, flickered with what might have been amusement. Team effort. Gary nodded, stepped into the elevator. The doors closed, and he was alone again, but somehow it felt less like isolation and more like someone had finally shown up to help hold the door. The elevator rose toward his apartment, and Gary let his head fall back against the wall, closing his eyes. Tomorrow there would be more complaints. More impossible requests and existential crises and virtual dogs that wouldn't fetch. But tonight, for the first time in months, Gary thought he might actually sleep. Maybe things were looking up. Maybe. End of chapter 1.